Everyone loves a great spy story, and that is exactly what we are talking about today on the National Security Science Podcast. We've known for a long time of 3 spies during the Manhattan Project who stole information for the Soviet Union. They were David Greenglass, Klaus Fuchs, and Theodore Hall. But today on the podcast, we'll listen to National Security Science writer Weston Phippen talk to Los Alamos National Laboratory senior historian Alan Carr about a secret 4th spy, Oscar Seborer. Oscar went by the ominous-sounding codename Godsend, and his existence, unknown to the public until a couple years ago. So who was this spy that managed to stay under the radar for so many years? How did he slip into the top-secret Manhattan Project nearly 80 years ago? And most importantly, what secrets did this spy manage to pass on? We'll listen to Weston and Alan get to the bottom of these questions, and if you were unfamiliar with the other spies at Los Alamos, we'll also be hearing a small portion of a presentation Alan gives about our history with spies. From the Los Alamos National Laboratory, where better science equals better national security, I'm your host, Brenda Fleming. Without further ado, get ready to look through a spyglass at Oscar Seborer, Los Alamos' formerly secret 4th spy.
Thanks for joining me, Alan. I was hoping to start off that we could set the stage here a little bit, and you could tell me how we came across new evidence of a Los Alamos spy, and why wasn't this publicly known before?
Right. So, Weston, nice to be here with you today. And the spies have kind of come out of the woodwork, various reasons. There were 3 that we knew about and have known about for many years now. But Oscar Seborer was not known to many until September 2019. It's then that he was publicly unmasked by 2 historians, John Earl Haynes and Harvey Clare. And Harvey and John did some incredible work going through FBI records and kind of stumbled across him. They weren't really looking for him. They were doing some research in a different area and kind of found him and broke the story. And that brings us, I guess, to today.
So I'm wondering how we found out about Seborer, whose code name or spy name was Godsend. Is that something that we uncovered in the Venona decryptions and worked backwards? And because we don't get to the Venona decryptions until the second part of your talk, can you explain that to us a little bit?
One of the most significant secrets of the Cold War was that the United States could crack very heavily encrypted Soviet codes, and the program that was responsible for doing that was called Venona. Stayed secret for a very long time. The Venona decrypts stayed secret a few years after the Cold War was even over. It was John Earl Haynes. John was one of the leading people inside the government. He was a historian at the Library of Congress, now retired, who pushed those files out and was able to help get them declassified and made publicly releasable. And so the release of the Venona transcripts, for instance, helped bring to light that Theodore Hall, known as Ted Hall, was indeed a spy here at Los Alamos. He made a public statement acknowledging that. You mentioned Oscar Seborer's code name of Godsend. I think what really tipped off the government more than anything, more than the Venona program, the transcripts, anything else, was that the FBI had an insider in the Communist Party of America who had kind of turned and was willing to help out the government.
So before Seborer comes to Los Alamos, he's at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, which is where another famous Los Alamos spy, Klaus Fuchs, spent time. And then when he does arrive at Los Alamos, he's in the same division as David Greenglass, another spy. Is there any chance you think that they knew each other?
You know, I've often wondered if some of the spies here knew each other. It's possible, So each of them had an interesting story, but 3 of them in particular, there's lots of potential places for overlap. Ted Hall and David Greenglass, Oscar Seborer were all about the same age, and they were all from New York City. Now, of course, there's a lot of people that live in New York City. It's not like, maybe if it's a little town and they went to high school together, maybe it's a little bit different. But that's not the case here. They are from New York City and all about the same age. However, we know that Oscar Sabor's older brother Stuart was at a college in New York where Julius Rosenberg was at the same time. So that starts to narrow it down a little bit. And when you think about it, communism was mainstream or pretty close to it in the late 1930s. We were at war against Nazi Germany, and the Soviet Union was one of our allies then, too. And so, when you think about relatively small, the City College there in New York, you might have people who are interested in communism going to meetings and things like that in the open, which they could do. And so, yeah, I don't think that it's totally out of the realm of possibilities that Stuart Seborer and Julius Rosenberg, Julius, of course, would die in the electric chair for espionage years later. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibilities that they knew each other.
I think with that, let's tune in to the first part of your lecture on Seborer.
This presentation is now longer because, unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess depending on how you look at it, a fourth spy was unmasked at Los Alamos, a wartime spy, in September 2019. Just a couple of years ago, we discovered this guy, Oscar Seborer. And so we're going to call him the Godsend because that was his code name. Seborer was born in 1921 in New York City. So Seborer is an interesting character. Nobody, at least publicly, knew about him until September 2019. And I want to mention my friends. I think I can call them my friends now, John Earl Haynes and Professor Harvey Clare. John Haynes was a historian with the Library of Congress. He is now retired and in Santa Fe, so just down the street from us. And Harvey Clare, who's still an active professor. These guys are the real experts when it comes to espionage. I'm not a historian of espionage. I'm a historian of Los Alamos National Laboratory. And so I don't think about this stuff all the time. This is one part of our story, but those two guys really are the experts. They wrote an article that was published in a periodical called Studies in Intelligence, but they accidentally stumbled upon this guy going through old FBI records. And I say we, the director of Los Alamos knew about Oscar Seborer in 1956. So why did it take so long for the public to find out? We're going to talk about that during the epilogue in a few minutes. But anyway, he has taken some electrical engineering classes at The Ohio State University. So what organization is that going to land him in? The Special Engineering Detachment. He is sent to Oak Ridge first. Okay, so both he and Fuchs were both at Oak Ridge before they came to Los Alamos, and he's a private in the Army for I think he ended up at Oak Ridge in late 1942 in the SEDs. He's a private for 1942, 1943, pretty much 1944 as well. He arrives here at Los Alamos as a private first class in December 1944, and he goes into the explosives division. So he's also in the same division as David Greenglass. And as soon as he arrives, they're actually making some progress on some very hard, long-standing issues. And so in an imploding bomb, you're going to have detonators that are going to set off the high explosive. Designing a reliable detonator is not easy, okay? So that's one thing. Designing the detonator itself. Making all the detonators go off at exactly the same time is another big challenge, and they were having all kinds of problems making this work. And so G Division was designing the detonator. Over in X Division, they're designing the detonator circuit, the actual little electrical component that's going to make it ignite. And they had been having real problems with this until about the time Oscar Seborer arrives. They start to make breakthroughs at that point in time, and because of that, it's not as big a deal as it was before. And that kind of frees up Oscar Seborer to do some different things. And so we know that he was transferred, we know, because of a lot of work that Ellen McGee did, by the way, here at the NSRC, going through records. We know that he was transferred to our division. The research division was one of the divisions that was created out of the fragments of the physics division, which had been blown up earlier, right, during the summer of 1944 reorganization. So research, because they're not really doing research as they had been and experiments and things like that. At that point in time, the design of the implosion bomb had basically been locked in place. We're just going to go with what we have and we're going to figure out a way to make it work. So the research division was tasked with helping to prepare for the Trinity test. So Seborer is loaned out to research to help them with the Trinity test. But anyway, as a member of the research division that's helping to prepare for Trinity, he was heavily involved in preparing the rehearsal test that was conducted on May 7th, 1945. The rehearsal test was also known, more colloquially known, as the 100-ton test, because they took approximately 100 tons of TNT, laced it with radioactive material, blew it up, and watched what happened. Because again, if you're going to set off a nuclear weapon for the very first time ever, maybe you should practice. And that was the idea behind that test. So some of you may have seen pictures of that before. There's some film of the 100-ton test being put together, but I would not be surprised at all if Oscar Seborer is in some of those photos in that film that you have seen before. You'll notice there that he gets, although he's been a private for literally years at this point, he gets multiple promotions at Los Alamos in a very short amount of time. He's promoted to technician 5th class and then to technician 4th class in the summer. And again, I think a 4th class is a sergeant. So same rank, same age, same division as David Greenglass. He requested to be part of the destination program. The destination program was basically, how do we get bombs from the continental United States to targets at this point in Japan? We don't know if he was accepted or not. He was on some early rosters. I don't believe he was on some later ones. That's where some of our research is ongoing right now. But we do know with a great deal of confidence that he was at the Trinity test conducted July 16th, 1945. In fact, not only was Seborer at the Trinity test, he was in the main control bunker at the Trinity test. One of his jobs was to work with the earth shock measurements of Trinity. This involved running geophones and collecting data from how the earth shook when the bomb went off. And guess where the control station was? It was in the main control bunker. We do have diagrams with his name listed on it there. Other people in the main control bunker would have included the director, J. Robert Oppenheimer. That's where the countdown was given by Samuel Allison. The division leader of X Division, George Kistiakowsky, Enrico Fermi. So basically all the big shots who were doing some kind of experiment, or they were just big shots, were kind of there. And so Seborer, according to the diagram at least, may very well have been within earshot of the countdown. The countdown was given over the radio, but it was given by Sam Allison in a room across the hallway from Oscar Seborer. Pretty remarkable stuff. So think about that for a moment. Stalin had a spy standing behind Oppenheimer, more or less, at the Trinity test. And so, yeah, spies amongst us here. Anyway, after the war is over, he's transferred to Z Division. If there's anybody from Sandia today, Sandia started out as a wartime Los Alamos Division, Z Division, and their job was, as you may have guessed, was to weaponize physics packages. And so he's transferred there. And so you can start to imagine what Godsend has access to. The detonating circuit, probably other aspects of the detonators, maybe of the high explosives as well. If he doesn't, Greenglass will have those. He knows an awful lot about Trinity diagnostics. He was there for the Trinity test and working in Z Division because we're working on weaponizing things. Probably knew how to put a bomb together, roughly speaking, at least probably saw photographs of parts, if not real deal atomic weapons parts as well. So Seborer would have had some valuable information as well, but we don't know how much he was able to take to the Soviet Union. That's one thing, again, we can, at this point at least, we can only make guesses. So let's keep moving things along because we want to finish this.
Well, thanks, Alan, for letting us listen to that really fascinating lecture. But I did have a few more questions.
Yeah, that sounds good.
So the first is, after Seborer goes down to what is now Sandia, what does he do after? And at what point does he decide to try and leave the United States?
We do know that he applied for a job to come back to the laboratory after the war was over, but for reasons that we don't know right now, he withdrew that application, and so I don't believe that he ever came back to Los Alamos. He was in the Navy for a while, but then he resigned from his position in the Navy also. And I guess that goes to the other part of the question there, when he fled the country. And it's interesting. I've used the term flee or fled. That's not really a good indicator of what it was like, though, when he left the country. He did not leave immediately. It's not like he just, snuck out of the country overnight because he thought that the feds were closing in or something like that. He took his time, bought some tickets a few months in advance. He, his brother, both of their wives, and Stuart's wife's mother, if I remember correctly, I believe they went to the UK first. I think that they went to Israel, which is where the Seborer parents had immigrated to. Ultimately, over the course of several months, they make this grand tour, and they end up in the Soviet Union, where they've decided to immigrate, and that's where Oscar and Stuart lived the rest of their lives. I believe that Oscar Seborer ended up marrying a Russian woman. He had another wife. He lived until 2015, so he was alive until just a few years ago. And to my knowledge, Stewart, I believe, according to John and Earl, Stewart was at the funeral. He may still be living, for all I know, although he would be getting awfully long in the tooth now.
I'm also wondering what we know about the information that Seborer might have passed along to the Soviets. I read in the publicly released documents written by Harvey Clare and General Haynes that one of the Soviet assets had claimed that Seborer had passed along the bulk of the information that allowed the Soviets to develop their own nuclear weapon. Is there any truth to that, or should we be skeptical?
Well, the John and Harvey, their research is superb. It's first rate. And as you mentioned, it was one of the people, somebody who knew Seborer at the time, who made that claim. We don't really know much about that person, for instance, and we really don't know much about what Seborer took. I mean, there's essentially no information that has been identified yet that conclusively shows what Oscar Seborer took and provided to the Soviet Union. Maybe someday the Russians will open their archives again. They were open for a brief point in time, and Godsend is mentioned less in Venona, if at all, and more in the Vasiliev notebooks. And so I should mention there that a Russian journalist named Vasiliev was given access, and he made copious notes during the time that he had access to the Russian archives, to the Soviet archives information. And those notebooks have become an invaluable source in this field of study. And again, I don't bill myself as a historian of espionage. I'm our laboratory's historian, and this touches on our story, and therefore, because of that, I'm interested in it. So because there's no concrete information that we've yet discovered about what he took, we can only guess. And so doing a quick recap, we know he was at Oak Ridge, but at least right now, I believe very, very little is known about what he did at Oak Ridge. We don't have any records here that would really give some insight into that. We know that they were enriching uranium, trying to figure out how to do it at that point in time. There was a lot of construction going on, but what would a private, and then a private first class really have access to? Probably not much at Oak Ridge. But again, this is only a guess right now, and it's something that Ellen is currently looking into there. When he gets to Los Alamos, even though he's still pretty low ranking, we do know what he was doing here to an extent. We know which group he was in. We know that they were working on the detonating circuit for the detonator. He did Trinity diagnostics. He was there at the rehearsal test, the 100-ton test, which was conducted May 7th. He was almost certainly in the main control bunker at Trinity and witnessed that. Seborer was there because the geophone recording equipment was. And so he knew about Trinity diagnostics. He was in Z Division, so he would have seen and probably handled bomb parts, seen photographs, been familiar with assembly procedures. So yeah, I mean, he would have had access to information that would have been very valuable to the Soviet Union. Really, I would think the collective value of all of this information that saved the Soviets maybe upwards of 2 years on their own program.
Well, thanks for that great lecture, and thanks for all the help you do at Los Alamos helping us understand our own history.
Hey, my pleasure, Weston.
A special thanks to Los Alamos National Laboratory Senior Lab Historian Alan Carr. The National Security Science Podcast is a spin-off of the National Security Science magazine at Los Alamos National Laboratory. We bring you stories from the lab's weapons program. Stories that show how innovative science and engineering are the key to keeping America safe. Or, as we like to say, better science equals better security. Thank you so much for listening, and find more at lanl.gov/magazine. That's lanl.gov/magazine.